Excuse me. Good evening, everyone. My name is William Iannuzzi. I'm president of the Board of Education. Oh, wait, we need Millie. All right, take two. Good evening, everyone. My name is William Iannuzzi. I'm president of the Board of Education. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Iannuzzi,
Here.
Miss Barrios Brooks, sounds fine. Miss Lewis,
Here.
Miss Castellano Minaya,
Here.
Miss Clayton Fernandez, Miss Ross,
Here.
Mr. Single,
Here.
Mr. Vega, Miss Williams. A quorum is present.
Colleagues, can I get a motion and a second to go immediately into executive session to meet with district counsel and discuss the employment history of particular persons, which may lead to the employment of a particular person?
So moved, Castellano Minaya.
Second, Lewis.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will be reconvening the public session of the meeting around 7 o'clock.
Travis, good answer, Travis. That was a test. You passed it. Yeah, it's just a gift.
Going away again or what?
You're going to a conference. When's that? On 18th. But the day I said I couldn't make it? Yeah, I got a doctor's appointment. That's why. That's all.
That's a bad reason.
Well, it's not. It's just a normal. It's all good stuff. Actually, I'm actually had the hernia operation on January 3rd. I'm all good. That was great.
Check one,
Now it's
two,
just,
three.
One,
1, 2.
I have a hip
One, two,
operation right
one,
now.
two.
I can replace my left hip. But he's like, this is the problem. He says, you're 53. He says, you're like 10 years early from the normal hip age. He says, the problem with you is if you do it now, you're going to do it at
Testing
75
1, 2.
day. So, so he's like, if you can kick it down the road a little bit, I'd wait another 2 years after surgery. I said, no, I want to do it before I leave work.
I said, well, get you tomorrow.
You know what's funny is I think you come back 3 weeks ago, I still have your little message. I'm like,
I said, listen, we'll just do tomorrow. I know what your schedule is. We don't, things that I'm doing. How are you today? That's good. Well, we talked about that.
Make sure these fans are on. Hi. Hey, Trav.
It's fine.
Wow.
hotel level come.
Try it. You know? Yeah, I'm gonna. I know it's the first time I said it.
Good morning, Sue.
I didn't think, I think I got 24/7. I think it shows up as 6. No, I no. There's only 2 schedules, so I know I didn't get you ready to work on something else. I think it's 6. I think it's 6 p.m. That's all. Well, did you just work? I think it's 6 p.m. That's why. And they don't have any other schedules. I have
Okay, it's all good.
1 or
No,
2.
thank you.
Yep. Yes, I'm gonna. Oh.
A little louder? I will.
Oh,
do my best.
No.
Although by now I know the way.
It can be on low, but it don't gotta be on high. Okay. That's why I don't like sitting next to her. All she does is talk through the whole meeting. It works. It still works. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Day for that day. Got a few more areas you can do, but I just.
Good evening, everyone. My name is William Iannuzzi. I'm president of the Board of Education, and we are about to reconvene the public session of the meeting. Colleagues, can I get a motion and second to reconvene the public session of the meeting?
So, second Lewis.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Our first item on the agenda is Board of Education announcements. Do any of my colleagues have any announcements they would like to make? No. I have just two. Really quickly, one, I just want to thank Vice President Brooks for chairing the meeting last week while I was away for a conference at work. I was able to catch some of the recordings, so thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for making such a great meeting without my presence. I also want to announce that if you're interested for running for the Board of Education, the packets are now available. You can either go on the district website or go in person to Millie, our clerk, and she has them in her office. Next up is our superintendent's update. So Dr. Reynolds, I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you very much, President Iannuzzi. Good evening to everybody watching from home, watching at a later date, to all of our members here in the audience. I would firstly like to congratulate our boys varsity basketball team who defeated North Rockland by a score of 53-42 on Sunday to become the Section 1 Class AAA basketball champions. The team now advances to the sub-regional postseason game, which will take place tomorrow at Yorktown High School at 4:45 p.m. against Section 4 champions Corning Painted Post High School. Please join me in congratulating our Section 1 champions. Just as a reminder, this month, it's the month of March, of course, we celebrate Women's History Month, and we also celebrate Irish American Heritage Month. Please be reminded that all elementary schools will have a half day of school on Monday, March 17th for parent-teacher conferences. All schools will be closed on Tuesday, March 18th for Superintendent's Conference Day, and all offices and closed will be closed on Monday, March 31st in celebration of Eid al-Fitr, which is the Muslim holiday that recognizes the end of the season of Ramadan. And with that, I conclude my report for tonight, President Iannuzzi.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Reynolds. Next up on our agenda is our discussion items, and the one we have for tonight is budget work session number 7. So Dr. Reynolds, I'll throw it over to you and your team to set the stage.
To the board and to the public, I wish you a good evening. Welcome back for budget work session number 7. This is the continuation of our budget discovery and discussion in preparation of the school board adopting a budget at our next meeting, which will be held on Thursday, March 20th at 7 p.m. at Davis Elementary School. So tonight's budget update continues our previous discussions about our budget process. I would like to thank those who have reached out with questions and with feedback. We continue to add your questions to our budget page on our website, which will be updated throughout this process. Since our last discussion, we have continued our advocacy for additional state funding with our state lawmakers. However, no additional funds have been promised at this point, so we continue to operate with the knowledge that we have a $20.2 million gap to close. I would be remiss if I did not thank specific individuals, and I would like you to know that in particular, our state senator, Shelley Mayer, our State Senator Natalia Fernandez, our State Assembly person, Mr. Steve Otis, and our State Assembly person, Ms. Amy Paulin, have been tremendous allies in our advocacy on behalf of our City School District of New Rochelle. So you may notice their names on our advocacy page. If you are so inclined to continue to advocate for New Rochelle, please ensure that your advocacy is directed to our Governor, Kathy Hochul, because we are in partnership with our senators and our assembly people who really are supporting us in this moment, as they always do. Let me clarify that. We would like to discuss also how we got here, and please forgive the repetition, but unfortunately, this might be the first opportunity for someone to become familiar with our budget. As those of you who have been following along the process are aware, we are now addressing a most challenging fiscal climate caused by many factors. A change to the state's formula this year has cut our foundation aid by almost $500 per student. The state has changed the practice of using 2000 census data in its calculation to instead use a combination of property values and adjusted gross incomes for our region. Because we are located in an area with high property values and higher than average incomes in our state, we have been hit especially hard. A hold harmless provision in the governor's proposed budget resulted in only a 2% increase over last year's foundation aid, which equates to approximately $1.3 million. In recent years, our annual overall increases in state aid have ranged from anywhere from approximately $3 million to $16 million last year. So imagine going from an increase of $16 million in one year to an increase of $1.3 million in the next. Even with the proposed $1.3 million hold harmless money this year, the amount of state aid increase the district would net after all of the calculations are finalized in our state aid calculations, we would net only under $378,000 in an increase from last year. Keeping in mind that a charter school opening in New Rochelle requires us to set aside funds in case any of our students choose to attend a charter instead of remaining with the City School District of New Rochelle. In New York State, school aid follows the child. For every student who lives within the City School District of New Rochelle and chooses to attend the new charter school, we must pay the charter school more than $19,000 per student. In that fact, we have set aside $1.9 million in our budgeting planning for this purpose. We have not historically sought the maximum allowable amount of tax levies. This has left us with nearly $8 million in unrealized revenue from taxes. We are now asking the board to approve a 3.59 proposed tax levy increase, which exceeds the tax cap and would require a 60% majority approval vote from voters to pass. During COVID, we delayed a district-wide review and adjustment of our offerings. We also brought on 20 additional counselors and clinicians to address our students' growing mental and emotional needs. The federal grant funds used to support them have now expired, and we have moved them into our general funds. Costs for health insurance have gone up dramatically. Our transportation costs jumped over $9 million in 1 year. And our retiree health contributions have increased. We developed a plan last year to decrease transportation costs, but we did not implement it. It is imperative that we do so now. Our vision is fiscal responsibility to our taxpayers and a high-quality education for our students. We will emerge stronger as a school district and remain dedicated to helping every student develop their fullest potential. Our plan for the future. Last year, we saw the fast approaching fiscal cliff and began looking at savings. We cut discretionary spending by 20% across the board and maintained that reduction into this year and for next year. Our primary goal is to avoid cuts that are student-facing and to maintain core instructional programming. Over the past 10 years, our student population has decreased by about 1,000 students. As a result, we need to rebalance our classrooms to ensure the most efficient use of our workforce. We will increase our class sizes slightly, but keep them within our already in existence optimal student-teacher ratios. Even with slightly larger class sizes, we will maintain equitable access to resources and learning experiences for students across the district. Special education classrooms are mandated by law and will remain unchanged. The need for robust student mental and social emotional support has grown. We have increased our team of mental health professionals, but are now funding them through our general budget as previously mentioned, ensuring that we have enough ongoing support for our students. We will alter the elementary school bell so that our contracted buses can complete 2 runs daily and reduce the number of buses, bus drivers, and monitors by up to half. We are working with our before and after school service providers to coordinate coverage to accommodate families with our new schedule. We will also reduce our contracted services and reevaluate our district-wide overtime costs for additional savings opportunities. We have frozen our hiring in certification areas and positions that are targeted for a workforce reduction. We will continue to hire only for vacated positions that require replacements. Unfortunately, we must reduce our workforce by as many as 200 positions. And again, this was a most difficult decision that was not made lightly. These reductions will include administrators, teachers, clinicians, custodians, civil service trades workers, monitors, and security personnel. We understand the impact it will have on our students and our community. I want to be clear, and I want everyone to understand. The 200 positions is a middle ground number. The 200 positions is a middle ground number. Even if we received additional state funding, we would have to ask voters to approve a 3.95% tax levy increase. The best case scenario is that the additional state funding on top of a 3.95% tax levy increase would minimize the amount of numbers of positions we would have to eliminate. So it could lower that number of 200, and we're hoping by a lot. But there is no scenario under which we don't reduce positions. The only scenario that is available to us for us not to reduce positions is to ask the community for the full 12.53% tax levy increase, and that is not something we are prepared to do. Any restorations to our community of employees would be prioritized by those most forward-facing to our students. Should our budget not pass, and this is the worst case scenario, it will equate to additional positions on top of the 200 that must be eliminated. And if for whatever reason our budget doesn't pass again and we go to contingency, there potentially will be an additional $10 million added to the current $20.2 million gap that will have to be filled. To walk us through the next portions of our function codes and our final portions of our function codes as it relates to our budget, this evening we're going to be visited by our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Carlos Leal, and our Business Administrator, Joy Mike. Keeping in mind that tonight, Budget Work Session number 7 sets us up for the final conversation to be held next week, Thursday, at our budget adoption meeting. Hopefully, we will have an adopted budget at the conclusion of next week's meeting on March 20th. So with that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Leal.
Good evening, Dr. Reynolds. Thank you. President Iannuzzi, board members, I'd just like to jump right in because, again, the first few slides are a repeat and want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about the additional function codes that we started to discuss last week and said we would be bringing additional items to you this evening. So again, the entire budget process is following these 6 steps, and we are engaged currently regarding the budget snapshot. Of course, all of the work that we have done is in line to our vision, mission, and equity vision for the district, and also aligned to our strategic roadmap, ensuring that student learning is at the forefront, that we support superb staff as much as possible, create safe, supportive, connected schools, and utilize our resources appropriately. The key factors going into this work and our current scenario, the first of the factors was, of course, the consideration of our transportation model and proposing a staggered elementary school schedule. The second is what are those capital priorities that we want to continue within the district, and also the proposal to purchase property adjacent to the high school for $1. That would be the second proposition. And then, of course, prioritize, realign, restructure, and reassign resources to meet all district needs. So our current scenario, again presented previously, our proposed tax levy is 3.95%, which is the same as the 24-25 school year, and it would require a 60% voter approval for an override. Our balance proposal, which has to, again, we have to provide to you a balanced budget, which is basically our expenditures have to equal our revenues, and that number is $359,468,597. Again, this includes a reduction in the workforce and a realignment of instructional programming. To do that, we have to close a $20 million budget gap. So how did we get here? Adding to what Dr. Reynolds just shared, at the onset, COVID-19 resulted in a delay of our district having a community conversation. In 1819, a large number, excuse me, of appropriated fund balance was used to cover the gap at the time. So we would have had to have a deeper conversation in 1920. We didn't get a chance to do that because COVID happened. And then funding started to come in, and so again, it delayed the conversation. And so here we are now having to engage in that discussion. Over the course of from the year 2020 to 2024, we've received and expended grant funds, around $25.8 million. Those includes both the ESSER dollars as well as 611 carryover monies. And I highlighted that a bit. 611 dollars we are, bless you, again, granted federal dollars annually. For those dollars that are not spent, they go into a carryover category. Under 611 that supports our special ed, we utilize those dollars to cover positions in the budget last year. Rollover dollars do not continue to follow, so those dollars have to go into our general account. Multiple years of choosing not to seek the maximum levy, which Dr. Reynolds referenced, increased transportation cost, that $9.9 million, unrealized opportunities for the transportation cost that Dr. Reynolds mentioned from last year, and again, the use of reserves and appropriated fund balance to bridge budget gaps. And then, of course, the health insurance premium increases. Our current additional financial constraints, for the purposes of the new charter school coming into our community, we have to budget $1.9 million to us in the event that there's 100 children that attend that particular campus. We also had an increase in pilot revenue, which then equates to a decrease in our maximum allowable tax levy. The executive budget state a proposal increases. So to give some context, in 21-22, we received an increase of $2.7 million. In 22-23 and 23-24, we received an additional $8 million each year. For 24-25, we we received an increase of $16 million. And for this school year, we received an increase of $377,000. And just by looking at that list, you can see the stark difference. Other budget variables that we have to take into consideration: the New York State Teacher Retirement System rate, which we were grateful to see that there's a decrease, even though slightly, but it's still a decrease of a negative 0.11. There's also a New York State Local Retirement System rate increase of 1.3%. And then the anticipated health insurance plan increases. So the impact of decreased employees and retirement contributions. So between 7.5% to 10% for active employees, and then 0.5% to 10% for retirees. Liability of their insurance rates increase. We've talked about right now, we're still waiting for that number from NYSER, but right now we're looking at somewhere between 12 to 15% increase. The utilities that fluctuate, our collective bargaining agreement salary increases that we are obligated to provide, and then transportation and other contractual renewal increases utilizing the CPI. So again, I mentioned that, again, we have to provide to you and the community a budget that is balanced. So taking a closer look at our revenues and expenditures, you've seen these slides prior as well. Here's a summary of our state aid. Categorically, on the left-hand side, under state, you'll see foundation aid, expense-based aid, instructional materials, other operational aids, and then our total expenditures. If you look at the, I'll call it the avocado section in the middle, where it says, where it shows our 24-25 governor's proposal, the 24-25% change, the 24-25 increase, and then the actual. So the increase for 24-25 was 7 million, is what we were indicated to have. And for 25-26, the increase is 1.3 million in that category of foundation aid. So if you have to just follow that row across to the right. Expense-based aid, if you go to the far right, you'll see that that's actually a decrease of $951,000. Instructional materials aid, there is a slight increase of $6,909, whereas the year prior was close to $1 million. Other operational aid is at 0, and then the total expenditures compared again to last year is only $377,167. Again, a shock to all of us when we received that notice. Dr. Reynolds mentioned the tax levy history. Again, here we can show for you. Again, if you go back at, as I mentioned, COVID, 1920, that particular year, the adopted tax levy was 2.2%. The maximum percent increase was also 2.2%. And I'm not sure if I can do the marker in that case. But if you start to look at 2021, the maximum percent increase was 0.38%, and we actually have an adopted tax levy of 0. In 21-22, we could have asked for 2.73%. We asked for 2.29%, and it moved to the far right. That's the dollar amount difference that we did not receive as revenue. In 22-23, we could have asked for 2.55%, and we went out to the community with a 0.98%. And in 23-24, we could have asked for 2.19%, and we went out to the community with 0.98%. Again, the reason we were able to do that at the time was because we were receiving those additional dollars from the state. Those are no longer coming in as revenue, and so for the budget last year, we were allowed to ask for 3.95%, and so we did ask the community for 3.95%. And as you can see, the difference on the far right would be 0 because we were able to collect all that we were able to collect in terms of revenue. This slide shows the tax cap calculation. We had quite a few community members say, hey, how do we get to the tax cap? So walking through this, again, you'll see the column 24, 25, and 26. On the far right-hand side, for 2026, the calculation itself, you start with the prior year tax levy. In this case, it's 231,593,967. Then you multiply that with the tax base growth factor of 1.0029. Then you add in the prior year pilots. In this case, it would be 4,081,394. And then you subtract the allowable capital exclusions from the previous year. In this case, it's 14,175,394. And then you multiply that with the levy growth factor, or CPI, or 2%. And that is 1.0200. And then you go on and then you subtract the budget year of pilots. In this case, it's an increase that we indicated earlier, which is $6,009,276. And then if there was any available carryover of 2024, which we do not, and then the total tax levy limit before exclusions is a total of $220,605,748. Then you look at the exclusions. So we have no capital tax levy, for current year, which is $11,750,584. We have no pensions, TRS, or ERS. Last year we did have 29,744 in ERS as an exclusion. We did not this year. And so the total exclusions is 11,750,584, or a maximum allowable tax levy of 200 so then you add that on, which gives you a total of 232,356,332, or a maximum percent increase of 0.33%. The actual tax levy that we are seeking is 240,741,929, or a 3.95% increase. Again, that requires a 60% voter approval for an override because it goes beyond the 0.33%. So even if we were to ask for a 0.34, it still goes above the 0.33, and we would have to seek 60% of the voters' approval. We've added on this a pictorial representation of the proposed revenue summary slide that you've seen prior to tonight. In this chart here, you'll notice on 25-26 draft budget, the dollar increase and also the percent change. So the real property taxes would be 240,741,929, or an increase of 9,147,962, again, a 3.95% change. Our pilots, in terms of revenue, would be 6,009,276. Again, it shows an increase of 1,927,882, or a percent change of 47.24%. Then you have the non-property tax items. That's 5,400,000, an increase of 800,000, or 17.39%. Charge for services, 4,030,000, an increase of 860,000, or a percent change of 27.13%. And then miscellaneous, 1,365,000, or a decrease in this case of 546,000. If you look at the next line here, this is the state aid. So this takes into account all of the state aid that we would be able to receive, which would be 90,916,908, or an increase of $2,030,042. Basically a change of 2.28%. Then it shows categorically another state aid and federal aid. Other state aid would come in at 7,160,652, which is again a decrease of $69,701, or a negative 0.96% change. Federal aid, 946,062, was in the previous year For 25-26, it's $860,300, or again, a decrease of $85,762, minus 9%. And then transfer from reserves. For 25-26, what we are proposing is $1 million, which is a decrease taking from reserves. Again, we don't want to continue to tap into those reserves. So that would be a decrease of $2 million, $2,080,795, or a percent change of 67.54%. And then less, yes, absolutely less. And then transfers from the library, 244,532, a decrease of 2,670, or a percent change of minus 1.13%. So in totality, excuse me, appropriated fund balance, what we're looking at here is the same as last year, which would be $1,750,000. So the total expenditures would equate to the number that we shared previously, which is $359,468,597. And you can see that represented in the chart to the right. Again, the property taxes makes up a majority of our revenue. State and federal aid is 27.5%. And some people in our community were asking, well, if we're getting less aid, does it really make a difference? In our case, it does, because that particular quarter of the pie is those dollars. Whereas there might be a neighboring district that doesn't receive as much federal dollars, and so they are their impact, or they're less reliant on those dollars. So our proposed actions, again, this is a repeat of our previous presentations, are to request the same tax levy increase as approved last year of 3.95%, reduce contracted services, evaluate and reduce overtime expenses across the system, stagger our bell schedule for elementary schools, balance class size ratios district-wide, and reduce district-wide workforce up to 200 positions. A recap of the bell schedule. Davis, Ward, and Trinity would start at 8 o'clock a.m. and end their school day at 3 o'clock p.m. Webster, Barnard, Columbus, and Jefferson would start at 8:45 a.m. and end their day at 3:45 p.m. We do have answers to the questions that we shared in the last presentation. We moved those to the end of the presentation, but do want to highlight here, the big question was, why did we select those schools in that particular order? And again, is Davis, Ward, and Trinity, the number of buses to support those three schools exceeds the number that you would need for Webster, Barnard, Columbus, and Jefferson combined. Doing it the other way around, we would not be able to tier our buses completely. In terms of class size ranges, in conversation with our school administrators, the column on the far left shows the grade, 24-25 shows the current averages in those classes by grade level, and 25-26 shows the range. And then the bold is what we're using to determine the number of classes budgetarily. However, the lower end within the range, i.e. in the case of kindergarten, you'll see here where we currently have 20 kids on average across the system. We're budgeting at 22 kids per class across the system, but we're operationalizing at 18 kids across the system. Basically, that range indicates that the lower end is where we are striving to stay at, and the farther end of the range, on the higher end of the range, is where we then have to have a conversation about another class being opened, so that we can accommodate and kind of equalize class sizes across the system. So you'll be able to see that in grade 1, 21 is our current average, 24 would be the high end for 25-26. Same for grade 2, and then in grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. The The current number is 19, 21, 20 respectively, and the end or the high end of the range would be 26. But I'll show you an example towards the end where you'll notice that there are, in fifth grade, for example, 22 on average would be the high end in what we're looking at for next school year. So not at the 26. Same scenario here for secondary, except we put courses as opposed to grade levels. So in grades 6 through 8, ELA, math, science, social studies, technology, world languages. Currently, in our seats across the system, we have kids, or students, excuse me, with students that have 18 to 25 per class. And for 25, 26, again, for budgeting purposes, we're looking at 25 or the higher end of the range. That's currently what we have. Grade 6 through 8, performing arts, again, for 24, 25, we have classes that have 20 kids all the way up to 30. And so we'll be planning for 25, 26 with 30 kids per class. The same for grades 9 through 12 for Region Science Lab. We have 20 to 24 students, and we would be budgeting at the higher end of the current range. Grades 9 through 12 in arts, business, ELA, ENL, health, math, performing arts, science, social studies, technology, and world language. The current range is 20 to 27, and we would be preparing at the higher end, which is 27. Grades 9 through 12, in current advanced placement classes, we have classes with 3 to 30 students, and so we would be planning with the higher end at 30. Grades 9 through 12, physical education, we currently have 28 to 45 students. We would be planning for 45 next school year. And then those specialty classes such as dance, weightlifting, wrestling, we currently have 20 to 30, and where appropriate, we would do 30 for next school year. In terms of the budget proposal with a position reduction, and here's the snapshot we shared last week as well. In terms of building instructional staff, which includes teachers, teacher assistants, counselors, and clinicians, if you move to the right of that first blue row, you'll see where it says 24, 25 positions. We currently have 1,168. And the proposed reduction for 25, 26 would be 111 positions in that category, which would be a percent reduction of 9.5%. Building administrators, including principals, assistant principals, house principals, deans, and department chairs, we currently have 39. The proposed reduction is 2, with a percent reduction of 5.1%. In the area of building operations and support, clerical support, custodians, food service staff, lunch monitors, registered nurses, teachers, aides, and security, again, all in service to the building. We currently have 491 positions in that category. The proposal is to reduce 48, and then the percent reduced there would be 9.8%. District administrators, in that particular category, we have assistant superintendents, executive directors, assistant directors, supervisors, coordinators, and consultants. We currently have 42 positions in that category. The proposed is a proposal to reduce 7 or 16.7%. And then district operations and support that include clerical support, finance and HR support, laborers, technology supports, and trade workers. We currently have 152 positions, and the proposed reductions would be 25 or 16.4%. So in total, we have 1,892 positions and proposing a reduction of 193 positions, or a percent reduction of 10.2%. So I will step back and allow Joy to step in to provide a deeper snapshot in the budget.
Good evening. So at our last meeting, we reviewed function areas including administration, facilities, technology, transportation, and security. This evening, we will be reviewing athletics, benefits and debt service, curriculum and instruction, special education, and student support services. So this first slide includes, we have a couple of slides on curriculum and instruction, function areas starting at 2010 for curriculum development and supervision, 2020 for supervision of regular school, 2060 research, planning and evaluation, 2070 professional development, 2110 contains most of teaching a regular school, 2250 for programs with students with disabilities, 2259 for English language learners, 2610 for school library and audiovisual, 2620 for educational television, 2850 for co-curricular activities, and 2855 for interscholastic athletics. It includes the proposed budget for 25-26 and the adopted budget for 24-25, with an overall proposed budget of these function areas of $161,229,677, which is an increase over the current adopted budget of $3,840,377 for an overall increase of 2.38%. Within these function areas, there is a reduction of BOCES budget to prioritize turnkey professional learning. There's an increase for BOCES services for research and assessment. There's an overall decrease in hourly staffing and overtime allocations, a decrease in contractual allocations across all function areas, an increase in tuition and related services expenses for our special education students. It's a shift of special education staffing that was previously paid for from the IDEA 611 grant fund carryover. It maintains co-curricular stipends and athletic programs and reflects a shift of BOCES expenses for athletic program officials and administration. It's important to note that within each function area, it will contain salaries, it will contain supplies and materials, contractual expenses, and also BOCES expenses. Benefits is in a couple slides in. I'm going to continue with curriculum instruction. This is the same set of numbers, but it's just additional details about what's behind these changes. It includes an increase for sports safety, equipment inspection, and reconditioning on the contractual side. All salary increases that are contained herein are aligned to collective bargaining agreements. The current proposal maintains the Kaleidoscope program, PAVE, and science research programs. It includes an enhanced district special education programming to meet the needs of our twice exceptional students. It also maintains the magnet options that are currently in place for our elementary students. The overall reductions that were sort of introduced in the previous slide by Mr. Leal are 2 district administrators, 2 district operations and support staff, 2 building administrators, 48 building operations and support staff, and 99 building instructional staff. You note that the changes are from 21 or negative 48% to an increase of 16.6%. So if you look at this group of function codes together under curriculum and instruction, again, it's an overall increase of 3.8%, $3.8 million, or 2.38%. The next area to discuss will be student support services. Function codes beginning in 2015 for student support services, 2016 and 2017 for family community engagement and My Brother's Keeper, 2040 for supervision of special schools, 2280 for occupational education, 2330 for teaching special schools, 2805 for attendance regular school, 2810 for guidance regular school, 2815 for health services, 2820 for psychological services, 2825 for social work, 2830 for pupil personnel services, and 7310 for youth program. You will note, before I get to the actual bullets on the left, several changes in 2015 through 2017 because those expenses have shifted to other function codes as appropriate with New York State's accounting standards. You'll notice an overall decrease in these function areas. The original, the current proposed budget of $22,135,719 is a decrease of $883. $883,000, I'm sorry, $334, or an overall decrease of 3.99%. I do want to recall again that the function codes will include salaries, supplies and materials, contractual services, and BOCES services. And so those percent changes range from negative 100% and up to, I think, 29.7%. So overall, within these function areas, there's a decrease in hourly staffing and overtime allocations. There's a shift of budget allocation from, as I just mentioned, the 2015, 16, and 17 budget code to other areas in alignment with New York State. Those areas include 2040 for supervision of special schools and 2830 for pupil personnel services. All salary increases are aligned to collective bargaining agreements, as mentioned, for curriculum and instruction. It does maintain CTE program options for our high school students. There is a shift of special school allocations into teaching regular school for Huguenot programming because Huguenot is considered to be a portion of New Rochelle High School and not a separate school of its own. As far as New York State reporting is concerned, there is a revision of night school programming to focus on core academic classes. And overall, in terms of the reduction in staffing, there's 3 district administrators, 1 district operations and support staff, and 12 building and instructional staff. And again, for these function areas, there's an overall decrease of 3.99%. 2830 includes pupil personnel services. There is a shift of a good portion of the student support services division within the pupil personnel services. So that includes the assistant superintendent and director into that function code. And so you'll notice a shift from the adopted budget in those areas into an increase for pupil personnel services and an increase in supervision special schools. That's for after school program and night school program. It is a realignment of those budget codes and it is not a brand new budget. The activities are remaining relatively the same. Okay. I will move forward into benefits and debt service, function codes 8070 for census enumeration, which will not come on the budget sheet next year. It's really master library, which is how our spaces are booked for our buildings and community. 9010, which is our state retirement system for our local retirement system employees or classified employees. 9020 for our teachers retirement system for all of our certified staff. 9030 for Social Security. 9040 for workers' compensation. 9050 for unemployment insurance. 9060 for health, medical, and dental insurance. 9070 for union welfare benefits. 9089 for other benefits. 9710 for debt service, serial bonds. 9711 serial bonds, interest really. 9714 tax certiorari bonds. 9731 for bond anticipation notes or bands. 9760 for debt service tax anticipation notes. You'll notice a shift there. 9789 for general debt service and 9901 for transfer to school lunch and special aid funds. Again, the proposed budget in that first column, the adopted current year budget for 24-25 in the second, overall budget of $99,313,903, which is an increase of just $2,051,523, or an increase overall of 2.07%. So within these function codes, there is a reallocation of the BOCES master library expenses to the facilities budget, which we presented last week. There is an overall decrease in hourly staffing and overtime allocations. There's a decrease in the overall retirement system allocation aligned to the reduction of workforce. There is an increase in health insurance premiums for both active and retired employees. There's a decrease in our capital debt service, and we had a large borrowing associated with a tax certiorari settlement, I believe in 2018, that will be fully paid for in this fiscal year, so it's not being planned as a debt service item for the 25-26 school year. There's an increase in our short-term capital debt service for phase 2 of our 2023 voter-approved safety and security projects, as we are still in the middle of that project. And it does eliminate a transfer to school lunch. As you know, we are a district who has free breakfast and lunch program as provided by the federal Healthy Kids. And so it's not even just state run, it's federal dollars that allows us to have free lunch for all of our students. And so that program is self-sufficient. And so the general fund is not really supporting the staff and operations in school lunch. But it does maintain a transfer to special aid, which is our F fund, if you will, for summer programs like ESY and also students that attend state-supported schools. So again, there's just a 2%, $2,051,523 increase in this area, or overall 2%. You will notice big changes, obviously, in the unemployment insurance. And anytime you have a planned workforce reduction, you will have unemployment claims, and so we are planning for that. And that is our snapshot of benefits and debt service. And so I will turn this back over to Mr. Liao to summarize.
Thank you, Joy. So to recap what was just shared in terms of expenditures, in summary of expenditures by function, for 25-26 proposed budget, the general support is $42,698,101. Again, it's a dollar change and the percent change from last year. Instruction and community services, the proposed budget is $189,286,825, which is a change or an increase of $3,187,19, or a increase of 1.7%. Transportation, the proposed budget is $26,169,768. The change is $4,221,416, or a change in 16.1%. Employee benefits is $86,569,567, an increase of $7,245,076, or an increase of 8.4%. And the debt service and transfers for the 25-26 proposed budget, it's $14,744,336, or a change of minus $3,426,569, which is a percent change of negative 23.2%. But overall total expenditures, you would see a change of 3.3%. And the proposed budget is, again, $359,468,597. If you move to the right of the screen, again, there's just a pictorial representation of those numbers. And a majority of the funds, of course, go to instruction and community, with general supports, 24% employee benefits, a smaller slither than before with debt service and transfer of 4%, and then transportation, which is 7% of our budget. The summary of expenditures by object. So if you think now around, or think about this in terms of categorically salaries and benefits. For 25-26, salaries and benefits combined is 260,710,122, or a change of $2,563,010, or a 1% change. If you then move to the picture, it'll show you there that 73% of the pie in the proposed budget is salaries and benefits. Contractual services, again, is $47,049,011. That is a change of $7,062,686, or a percent change of 15%. That is inclusive of our transportation. Supplies and materials, the proposed budget is $3,410,389. A change of $57,016, or a percent change of 1.7%. And BOCES services is $22,097,920, or a change of $1,888,697, or an 8.5% increase. Debt service and transfers is $14,744,336. Again, it's a change of negative $326,569, or a percent change of 23.2%. The total expenditures, of course, again, is $359,468,597, or an increase or a change in by $11,982,883, or a percent change of 3.3%. Again, the illustration on the right shows that a majority of our expenses are related to salaries and benefits, followed by contractual services at 13%, BOCES services at 6%, debt service and transfers at 4%, and then other. And supplies and materials is only 1%. So here they are side by side. Again, we've illustrated that prior, but seeing this, I think, in one slide kind of illustrates where a majority of the funds are going. And coming from, yes. So the proposed tax levy summary, we've shared this in numerous slides. Again, would be 3.95% for a revenue of $240,741,929, which would be a tax levy increase of $9,147,962, or a tax levy percent increase of 3.95%. So to illustrate, per 1,000 assessed value, which is currently projected, it would mean $901.48, or an increase of $34.26. And we received this from the city. So to illustrate, we would, an average New Rochelle home assessed value of $16,000, it would equate to an annual increase of $548.08, or a monthly increase of $45.67. Again, to remind everyone, this does require 60% voter approval for an override because we are going beyond the 0.33%. And again, this is for illustration purposes only because we do understand that assessed values do change. So moving forward, what does all this mean in terms of where we are now and where we're going and where we need to go collectively as a community is realign our practices and potentially shift the timeline of our current strategic plan or our roadmap. Begin to truly engage in long-range financial forecasting. There's now a solidified team truly looking at all aspects of this, and so we should not find ourselves in a position where we're saying, oh, 4 years ago X happened, 5 years ago happened, to be able to plan and forecast ahead so we don't find ourselves here again. And then again, truly engage in programmatic review district-wide. What changes are occurring now? What changes need to occur in the future? Budget vote details. If the proposed budget passes on May 20th by 60% majority, the enacted budget that was presented this evening will go into effect on July 1, 2025. If the proposed budget is defeated, Then we may resubmit the defeated budget, allowing enough time for legal notices, or submit a revised budget, allowing enough time for legal notices and conduct a revote on June 17, 2025. Or adopt a contingency budget. If the revised budget, those items I just indicated, are defeated, the BOE must adopt a contingent budget. The contingency budget limits school districts to the amount of the previous year's tax levy. In this case, would be $231,793,967. I'm sorry, $231,593,967. That starts to kind of wrap up our conversation tonight, but moving forward, what we need to continue to do is continue to engage and communicate with all members of our community. We have seen an increase in emails and phone calls and chats, and so we really appreciate that and hoping that we are helping folks to understand all these pieces. Continue with our transportation planning to find further ways to save money and efficiencies. Continue with a plan for construction and renovation because we need to do that to make sure that all of our schools are properly prepared to receive our children and provide a safe environment. And then looking ahead, the budget adoption again to the BOE, if accepted, would be next Thursday, March 20th, 2025 at Davis Elementary, followed by a budget hearing on May 6th at New Rochelle High School. And then the budget vote to the community on May 20th, 2025, which would be at district-wide polling locations. Advocacy and stakeholder feedback. Again, we continue to ask people to reach out. And as Dr. Reynolds mentioned, and a lot of the emails that we have been receiving have actually been, how can I help? How can I advocate? What's happening to us isn't fair, et cetera, and what can I do? And so we on our website, on the budget page, there is a link to our state officials. However, I do want to add, as Dr. Reynolds did this evening, to please contact the governor's office. That would be extremely helpful. But again, feel free to please email the board at boe@nredlearn.org. Email any questions pertaining to the proposed 25-26 school budget to budgetquestions@nredlearn.org. And please attend the school board meetings, watch the meetings, streaming online, websites, et cetera, to be informed as much as possible.
So in conclusion, I acknowledge that the burden of responsibility in this budget is falling on our citizens and taxpayers, and we do not take that lightly or for granted. In addition, it must be noted that our workforce, which also includes residents of our fair city, will be greatly affected by our upcoming budget. It pleases me to state, in support of our taxpayers, the superintendent's extended cabinet has elected to join me in foregoing our pay increase to our salaries for the 25-26 budget year. I must take this moment to publicly thank our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. Olivine Roberts, Assistant Superintendent for Business, Carlos Leal, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, Dr. Gail Joyner, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Joan Garone, Executive Director for Human Resources, Tracy Jackson, Executive Director of Educational Leadership and Early Learning, Dr. Nicholas Krakow, Business Administrator, Joy Mike, and Director of Public Information, Monica Mahaffey, for their selfless act in support of and in commitment to the members of this community. We remain focused on our mission, vision, and core beliefs. We know these decisions are difficult to make and will have long-term effects on our students, staff, and community. Our vision is fiscal responsibility to our taxpayers and high-quality education for our students. We will emerge stronger as a school district and remain dedicated to helping every student develop their fullest potential. Thank you for your continued partnership and support, and we will keep you informed as we move forward, the key word being together. And with that, we open this up for questions and discussion to the board.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reynolds. Do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions? Ms. Clayton?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for everyone coming to our big sit down and laser focus to a big commitment coming forward. I absolutely think this document is super helpful because it gives us metrics to tag along, see how we do for next year. But I had a few questions, Joy, for you in the budget snapshot, benefits of debt and debt service. There's a line at the very end. It says eliminates transfer to school lunch and maintains transfer for special aid expenses and summer programs. I know that this year there was a big push to have nutrition for the kids. Are we going to see some struggles with food security for our kids in this new budget? Sorry.
Thank you. So the decrease in the transfer to school lunch is because the school lunch program is maintained by federal dollars, if you will, because the district is free lunch, free breakfast for all students. What that means is the general fund does not need to support the food service operations, that there is enough funds in that school lunch to sustain itself and provide for repair needs and things of that nature. So that's why there's a decrease in the general fund burden for school lunch.
Okay, wonderful. And then for the summary of expenditures by function, I noticed the transportation number, that 16.1% is just, does that include the change of bus, with the bus, with reducing the bus schedules and making that big change?
Unfortunately, it does.
Okay. All right.
Do any of my other colleagues have any questions? Ms. Brooks?
Thank you both, and thank you all three. I have a couple questions. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Can you please just give us a little more color on the increase in interscholastic athletics being 33%? Was there something particular that's driving that increase?
I will say that the overall services are being maintained from year to year. I think that the one team that was added last year was flag football. However, the cost for the officials was never properly allocated to the athletics budget, and now we have a better handle on the true expense for that. Most of that is BOCES, but it's being allocated to where it needs to be. I think it was distributed in previous years, but that creates its own issues because you do have to encumber those funds at the beginning of the year, preferably. But there's really no increase in BOCES services there. It's just allocating it in the correct space.
So just to be clear, it was somewhere else in the budget and now is here.
Yes, it was sort of distributed into mostly the 2110 codes, teaching regular school, and it really needs to stay within the athletics budget.
Great, thank you. My other sort of related question, this is just understanding where things are in these codes. Where can we think about the charter school, like aside money, what code is that under, or codes?
Sure. So that is also in 2110 teaching regular school. So that includes the $1.9 million set aside for charter.
And
2110 includes the $1.9 million set aside for the charter.
got it. Okay, thank you. And then my last question is more of a question in terms of budget activities for the rest of the coming months. Can you, maybe this is for Dr. Reynolds, speak a little bit to the kind of community outreach plan and how people who may want to get more information about the budget in a more intimate setting, what their options might be?
Yes, thank you for that question, trustee. So I'm going to just fast forward just to remind everybody of our budget timeline. So please keep in mind, I'm going to look at that screen. So please keep in mind that our budget adoption meeting will take place at Davis Elementary School on Thursday. Keep in mind, that's a Thursday. Next week, Thursday, March 20th. At that meeting, the board releases to us the final vote in either approving this budget or asking for a change to the tax levy cap increase. But that is what is within their power. At the budget hearing, which takes place on May 6th, we have to again just refresh the memory of the community of what the proposed budget is. And on the budget vote date, that's a date that we're asking everyone to get out to vote. That takes place on May 20th at your separate budget polling locations. But between the date of March 20th and May 6th, there will be many opportunities for you to become familiar, more familiar with the budget on a more intimate setting and a more intimate opportunity. So as of right now, I believe different entities have worked with my executive assistant, Ms. Ana Santiago, in securing dates of our roadshow presentations, which will come to different areas of the community, mainly with our PTAs. So you will see that we have some dates set up in the evenings for us to visit with PTAs to go through the entire budget. So as we've split up this budget over multiple meetings so that we can spend some time in depth with the different function codes, we will present the entire budget in its totality to those community events. So if you belong to, and I'm sorry in advance, but if you belong to a neighborhood association and you would like for us to come and visit you to share with you the budget, please contact our office. The number here is 914-576-4200. Again, 914-576-4200. You'll speak directly with Ms. Santiago, and she will try to schedule an opportunity for us to come to you to share the budget. But basically, this budget in its current iteration tonight is still the superintendent's proposal to the board. On March 20th, the board adopts a budget and it becomes the district's proposed budget. It is then my job to sell the budget to the community. Keeping in mind, you will never hear any individual, and I'm stating this for our working public as well, as an agent of the school district, to tell you to vote for the budget. We cannot legally do that. What we can do is present to you and sell to you the budget and remind you to get out to vote. So that is what you will be hearing from us on those multiple occasions. And I believe to date, we have 13 engagements between March 20th and May 6th to discuss the budget in different areas of the community.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Lewis?
Hi, just a few questions. Sorry, I'm moving over. This better? So back on page 22, I just want to reiterate that we have the vast majority of the positions reduced are district administrators, right? And nearly 17% compared to our building instructional staff, for example, that come in around 10%.
Trustee, thank you very much for highlighting that. So per capita, yes,
Mhm.
the vast majority based on percentage per capita
Correct.
are administrators in the district or closely are aligned with the district offices. So you look at 16.7%, even though the number, and I know people are looking at numbers, right? So you're only cutting 7 administrators. Well, compared to 42, having 42, that's 16.7%. We're looking at reducing personnel on the district operation level of about 16.4%. Keeping in mind that one of our goals is to ensure that our budget does not affect the touch points of our students, the forward-facing positions of our students, as much as it could, right? We want to prevent that. And again, keeping in mind, and I want to make this very clear, there is no current iteration where a gift of a miracle of money comes that there are not any cuts. Our goal is to replace those individuals that are closely connected to the classrooms before we do anyone else. So please, I want everybody to understand that. And also, it must be noted that any miracle of money that comes now, it is my prediction that if we were to take it and have it affect our personnel and our programming, we are literally just rolling the ball over to next year. And we might be right back here again. And I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but if you recall what I stated last year in our budget presentation, I shared that we are at a precipice where we were going to face a budget gap. And I predicted that it was going to be about 2 years out. And in my prediction, I shared with the public that based on the amount of years that we did not take the fully funding of the tax cap levy, you can anticipate it's going to be about that many years of course correction once we do hit that precipice. That was my prediction last year. This year, that precipice approached us faster than I anticipated. That is why we're here. I do anticipate that we're going to have several years of course correction. I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation thinking that I'm saying it's going to be cuts as it relates to personnel. It will be how we look at our programming. It will be looking at our policies and what we might need to change in order to realize savings. But it's going to be us looking at the different layers of our instructional and our operational programming to ensure that we can put this district on a correct course so that we're not here forever.
So just to follow up with that point too, if there is some time, years down the road, where we perhaps will have the funding years down the road to rehire some of our people back, could we?
So yes, in a perfect world, if we are able to course correct faster and start to bring back some of our positions, absolutely. So keep in mind what New York State law requires us to do is to maintain a preferred eligibility list or a Pell list. What it is, it constitutes all of the individuals who will be reduced in this workforce reduction. And for 7 years, we have to maintain this list. So if a position opens back up, if we have an opportunity, as Assistant Superintendent Leal stated, in returning a classroom, because we need an additional classroom once we get to that number, we have to recall back one of the individuals who were reduced. We have to let them know that this position is available, that they're entitled to it, and it's based on seniority of when they were hired. So there's a whole other legal aspect to that. But for 7 years, any position that we are reducing, if we replace that position, those persons are entitled to those positions. We have to notify them in writing. And if they are gainfully employed and do not want to return to the district, they have to notify us in writing that they're not interested at this time, and that will start the hiring process, or we have to go to the next person who's on the list. So that has to be maintained for 7 years, and that becomes I'm going to say, second most sacred document in this district, the first one being the seniority list, right? So those go hand in hand, and we want to ensure that we are inviting our persons back as they should be.
And my last question, you mentioned that what we're looking at now is the middle of the road scenario. If, for example, the budget's voted down and we go to the contingency or the other plan and we have to vote again, right? It goes to the public again. Would we now be seeing an increase in that 200 and programming, or just one or the other?
Thank you for that question. So yes, we're at the middle road now because we have chosen to present a budget that exceeds the tax cap. That 193 positions that we discussed is in this moment in time. It's frozen with where we are currently. If we were to get additional funds from wherever, again, that magical, pot of gold, it's Irish American Heritage Month, though the pot of gold really makes sense in that moment. If we were to realize some of that money, it would mitigate the amount of positions that we would need to cut. So that 193 will go down to 150, then 120, and things of that nature. But if our budget were defeated at the 3.95%, we could either recommend to the public that budget at 3.95%. We could recommend to the public a new budget coming less than 3.95%, or we can just state we should go to contingency. And when I say we, I mean the Board of Education. Any of those instances below 3.95% will increase the amount of positions that we would need to cut based on whatever number we're at. After receiving that pot of gold, if we're at 150, then we might need to cut to 140 or something along those lines. If the budget fails twice and we go to a contingency budget, which we are forced to do by law, if we present the budget again and it doesn't pass, the contingency budget is an even deeper cut. So that means that we're going to have to cut additional positions based on wherever we are on that date. But along with that, there are also limitations of what the district can allow for our public that are written in law. And those conditions could be non-use of our fields on the weekend, because you're not, once you're in a contingent budget, you're not supposed to be doing anything extra. So, you know, all of the overtime for manning fields on the weekends or schools on the weekends, that will no longer be an option. So we're going to have to mitigate that. The question that comes in is, well, what about our sports programming, you know, after school? Those will still be in place because they are part of our kind of core programming. So we will always offer those and allow the opportunity for individuals to work during those. But anything that's community related would have to be removed from our offerings just based on the laws of contingency.
Thank you.
Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Ms. Ross?
Hello, good evening. So I have a couple of bigger, kind of broader questions and then a few very specific questions on the slides. So just kind of following up to that question in terms of contingency, is the cuts that we've been talking about at this point then become much greater,
Yes,
if that's the case, correct?
that is correct.
Okay. And have we come up with the worst case scenario of what that means at this point, or no?
Yes, we have. We've come up with our 0.33% presentation, which we originally presented to the board. That is approximately, if we were at 0.33 with nothing else, we're at about 350. Somewhere between 350 to 400 positions that would have to be eliminated.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess my other question is really around, and both you, Dr. Reynolds, have mentioned it, as well as Mr. Liao, is the planning for not just this year, but kind of thinking forward towards the future with an eye to the future. And so in terms of looking at some of these proposed actions, the things like contracted services, evaluating, reducing overtime, how are we kind of thinking about the future and preparing for that, not just for this year, but for next year? Oh, how are we preparing for not just this year, but next year in terms of thinking about the actions that we're taking this year and how it will impact us in 2026 and beyond?
The realignment of practices is really somewhere that we were prior to COVID. And I know that, and of course this was prior to my arrival, but it's my understanding that the board was looking at all of our programming district-wide to really assess what is working for our students best, what we're still committed to, what it is we would like to expand, what some things are that we might like to reduce. Even some offerings that are not mandated by state law that we provide to our community as a gesture of good faith and also of community partnership. Those are the conversations that will be begun, that doesn't make sense, that we will begin immediately following our budget approval, whatever budget it is that's approved by the community. So we're really going to look at all of those things that, I don't know how else to say it, that make us New Rochelle, right? All of those things that we do that is above and beyond for our students and our community than most of our other communities. Many of the offerings that we provide to our students and to our adults. Everything is on the table for conversation, and that is what we will have to look at in order to realign what it is that we are committed to with what it is that we can afford. Because I don't want to be in this position again, ever. I don't want us to be in this position again where we have to talk about widespread reduction of workforce. That's not conducive to our students, it's not conducive to our workforce, and it's not conducive to our community.
Great, thank you. And then I just have some questions on some of the slides, specifically, I believe if we looked at slide, I think it's 16, where you have just the revenue summary. And it was just a question on if you can remind me when you talk about transfers from reserves and appropriated fund balance, what the difference is between those two.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Joy to
I
and
figured
Carlos,
Joy.
because this should be done jointly. And quite honestly, you're going to see some iteration of this team at our budget workshops. It will always be me, of course, God willing. And if most of the time it will be Carlos. So we're all prepared to answer this question. So I would like for you to hear from both of us.
So the question, I'm sorry, was the transfer from reserves?
Transfers from reserves and the appropriated fund balance, just the difference between the two.
Oh, thank you. So the transfer from reserve, so if in the previous conversation, we talked about how the reserves are certain set asides that can only be spent for specific purposes. The money set aside in the reserves are set aside for a specific purpose. And so it's not fluid money in the sense that we can then just use those dollars to backfill something. So a perfect example would be our capital reserves. Those dollars can only be used for capital projects that are approved. In terms of the appropriated fund balance, those are dollars that are set aside that have a little bit less of a restriction, so that those dollars, in fact, would be utilized in a more flexible manner. You want to add to that?
So appropriated fund balance is really used to assist with bringing down the tax rate. It's using district savings overall that aren't appropriated so that you can lower the tax rate for the community. In terms of the transfers from reserves, last year we transferred a significant amount of funds from our debt service reserve. We also transferred funds from our ERS reserve, because if you recall, last year ERS was going up by more than 2%. So we appropriately used that reserve to mitigate the impact to the taxpayer. And so we don't have those same conditions because ERS is not going up over 2%. It's not an exclusion on the tax cap calculation. And so it's kind of tough to justify further use of the reserve for that purpose.
And then the 17,500, 1,750,000, yes, is how do we decide on that amount?
Frankly, it would be great if we could decrease it over time because it's hard to maintain that, using savings to decrease the tax rate. But when you have an environment where you have a reduction in workforce and you're making a number of other reductions and you have a shortfall of revenue, it's really tough to say you're not going to maintain that same appropriation of fund balance. So it was really just keep it the same, if you will, rather than, which you would like to do ideally, is to decrease it so that you don't sort of run out of those savings because it's not a infinite
Correct.
pot of
Right.
dollars.
Yep. Thank you.
So districts are allowed to maintain 4% of unappropriated fund balance. Municipalities actually have higher limits, but that is all that we are able to maintain outside of our budget. Anything in excess, which is not the case for us in this moment, you would have to look at your reserve planning to see if you would appropriate to a reserve fund.
Got it. And then just in regards to the busing, it's only elementary schools. There's no difference in middle school starts or high school?
That's correct. It's only yellow school busing for our elementary schools. We don't offer those for our secondary students.
And the middle school bus transportation costs, are those in the general transportation line as well?
Yes.
Okay. And
that would be in the form of the cards,
yeah.
Mr. Liao may be the better person to answer that. It is the Beeline system, and so our regular transportation, I believe, was function code 5510. Public transportation is the line item or the function code that would be for the Beeline system.
Okay. And the the budget, excuse me, the position reductions that we have in staff, where in the different budget lines would you see that reflected? Whether it's in here or there's in the number of slides, where would you actually see those dollars kind of reflected? Or the position cuts, like if you're looking at the specific budget lines, where would you see that? Is
Okay, so it's going to be distributed throughout because remember each function code includes salaries, supplies and materials, contractual, and BOCES. So where you see a percent change that is negative, there will most likely be some reductions in workforce. But to determine whether or not that's a building administrator or a district administrator, you wouldn't see that level of detail. But all of the reductions are distributed throughout all of those function codes. So where you see more significant decreases, you might see a different balance of positions being reduced or hourly being reduced.
so, for example, I think it's on slide 31 where you have salaries and benefits, contractual services, all those line items. It's pretty much flat. But I think also in there that probably includes the increases in the benefits, the health insurance, the retirement benefits, salary increases, et cetera, which is then what keeps that pretty much flat between last year and this year.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then on that same page, there's a line that's other. And what was in that line again? That's 3.8 million and change.
So if you look at the bottom of the slide, it includes the equipment, software, textbooks, and tuition expenditures.
Yeah, and what is tuition expenditures? Whose tuition?
The tuition to our out-of-district if we're paying.
Students.
Yes.
And so and then I did see that special education was an increase in 6 million as well. And so does that include that in there, or is this also kind of separate to that?
I'm trying to answer your question correctly. So in terms of tuition expenses, we have it also for charter school students that would not be in the special
Okay.
education
Okay.
function code. So the special education drivers, some staffing shifting from grant funds, as well as tuition for special education students and related services, whether or not they have a one-to-one aid or they get speech services or PT or OT services. Those expenses are reflected in that 2250 function code.
And that's also, I think, the state requirements as well, right? In terms of making sure the class sizes are a certain amount and kind of keeping to whatever our state regulations are.
Yes, so keeping in mind that anything related to special education and IEPs are state mandated and regulated. So for instance, a particular classroom, and people might have heard these designations in the past, an 811 classroom. It's a specific it's a specific prescription of the definition of the classroom setting. So that means there are 8 students for one teacher, for one teaching assistant, or for one teaching assistant. So whenever we have to get a variance, it's because from the state, it's because we don't have enough classroom spaces or special education teachers to maintain what the regulated specification is for that classroom. So we may have to put in another student because we're not going to create a brand new classroom just for one student. So we have to reach out to the state to give a variance and show all of the steps that we've taken in order to not request this variance. So those designations for special education are prescribed by law, and that is why you'll see an increase, because we do, as we stated last year, have to increase the types of offerings and the amount of special education classrooms to meet the needs of our district.
Right. Okay. And then one last question, which kind of goes back, I guess, to just transportation. And it's slide, my eyes aren't so good. It's slide 30, which just shows transportation increase 4.2 million. And so I know we've changed the bus schedule. So does that still include just contractual increases with, what are they, first student?
Yes, with first student. So it does include increase to the contract. And that is also inclusive of the plan to reduce the amount of buses that we're using. So that increase reflects all of the changes that we are proposing.
Yeah, they're in there. So without it, it would have been like 6.5 or 7, close to $7 million.
Correct. If
Okay.
not more.
Right.
So two additional considerations in that particular category because of the increase. We keep talking about the CPI, and I want to clarify. So our consumer price index for transportation is different than the consumer price index that we might use for other purchases. It's set by the state. So the last year, I believe it was 4.1 or 4.2 that the state set. And the two years prior to that, it was up to 6%. So the CPI for transportation is usually higher than the CPI that we're accustomed to for all the other adjustments. This also includes some additional routes that were needed to be accommodated for some of our special ed students as well. So we had some that are coming off because we're much more efficient. Some that are coming off because of the staggering of the building, but yet we also have to take into consideration that there are additional needs that also have to be met.
Got it.
And if I could add before our next question, just as a reminder to the community, some of the questions come in, well, why don't you just change your transportation provider? We wish that it were that easy. Please keep in mind that by state law, we are required to submit a request for proposals for our transportation contract. For the past few years, the only company that has applied for our contract is First Union. Because, again, I have to remind everyone, statewide and nationally, we have a shortage of bus drivers, we have a shortage of bus monitors. So districts are not able to spread themselves thinly as relates to accepting multiple contracts. Last year, for the first time, as a part of this team's thinking and out-of-the-box thinking, we broke up our request for proposal. So we made smaller contracts. Maybe one bus company would just take our special education routes, another our general education, another just our sports and athletics. Even with breaking up our RFP, only one company applied to each of those RFPs. So we are in a state where we are currently committed to the one vendor who's replying to our RFPs.
Thank you.
And I
Ms.
did
Anaya
too.
and then Ms. Williams.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Leal, and Ms. Mike. This is our 7th budget work session, and you have given us consistent information and answered the question from the board and from the community and made adjustments as needed. It's difficult to accept what the community is being asked to do. And I think that it would be beneficial if you could just reiterate slides number 7, the current scenario, and also slides 9 and 10, how did we get here? So that, each time we hear it, we understand it better. And with understanding, we can accept it better.
Excuse me. Thank you for that question. So just looking at slide number 7, our current scenario, based on our tax levy calculations this year, the district has been afforded a 0.33% tax levy increase. That is what our maximum allowable is. In any event that a board adopts a budget that asks the community to go beyond what their maximum allowable is, It is required by state law that that budget passes by a 60% majority vote. This year, our 0.33% maximum allowable offers us an increase from last year to this year in our state funding of $377,000 net. Keeping in mind, and I'm just going to use round numbers, so please
Okay.
don't hold me to this math, and if you do, I'm going to ignore your questions. And I'm not talking to the board, I'm talking to everybody. So let's just say we came into our budget a few years ago at $150 million. In 1 year, we received an increase of that $150 million by $3 million, right? That's what we received from the state net.
Mhm.
So now we are working with a budget of $153 million. The next year, and I can exemplify it by this spell here. Forgive me, please. The next year, in 2022-23, we start with that $153 million, and then we got an increase of an additional $8 million. So that 153 plus 8 is what we were working with. I'm not going to try to do the math in my head, forgive me. So that new number is what we start with in 23-24. In addition to that, we got another $8 million increase. So the numbers kind of compound a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Following that, last year, we start with that new number as our budget, and we got a $16 million increase on top of that. Because everything has been moving at such a rate that it was determined that we were supposed to get that much of an increase in order to kind of stay afloat. This year, based on how the foundation formula was allocated to us and how certain variables within the full funding formula were changed, we're only realizing an increase of $377,000. So that is how we got here, and that is why we feel that we need to present a budget that goes above that 0.33%. We initially started the conversation, and this group worked on a budget presentation to the board of a 2.95% increase. After one of our presentations, and we looked at what would really be affected and what cuts would have to take place, the board requested that we continue that work, but with a new proposed tax levy increase of 3.95. What would that mean? That's what we would like for us to develop the budget on. So that is what we're presenting to you currently. It is the same number and percentage number that was approved last year, but we didn't have to pierce the tax cap. So again, we're going to need a 60% voter override. What we have to do is present a balanced budget. So in order to present that balanced budget, even with a 3.95% override of the tax cap, we still have to reduce our workforce. We still have to look at our programming. We still have to anticipate that we're not going to get an additional cent from that pot of money that I was talking about that just magically appears from out of the sky from the state. So with that, we know that we have expenditures of $359,468,597. So we have to, expenditures. So we have to build the revenue equal to the dollar, to the penny, basically, so that we present to the board a balanced budget. So with our proposal of a 3.95% tax levy increase that exceeds our tax cap and the balanced budget, that will close our current gap of $20,216,317. That's what our gap had to be closed. And going back to how do we get here, keeping in mind that during the years of COVID, and we had this graph last year, and I was asked to reintroduce this graph for our next presentation, so please keep in mind. The tax levy that we were allowed to ask was going up, right? So we were at numbers, but we were also offered grant funds for COVID. So we asked for less than what we were able to ask. We left all of that money on the table, basically. And because we were in COVID, because school was in flux, because, for many of us, we don't need to be reminded, New Rochelle was ground zero. This was the first place COVID was experienced. So, basically the world was watching to see how we operated. we did not want to change our programming or offerings.
Right.
So we just stopped all of those conversations, knowing that we would not be able to maintain, even back then, we would not be able to maintain a budget that would prevent us from going above the tax cap. That was back in 2018-19 that the district knew that. But we stopped all those conversations because we got $25 million in grant funds, right, from the feds and from the state. So we utilized that to close our tax cap. Over multiple years, we chose not to seek the maximum levy, so that was about $8 million. But again, those numbers compound, right? So we have to keep that in mind. We increased our transportation costs of about almost $10 million during those 4 years. That's how much it's gone up, right? So even with school districts not being able to offer more, that CPI that Mr. Leal was just talking about, that's prescribed by the state, increased. So our costs increase. Keeping in mind that we did not do the transportation plan that we had, that we were in the middle of negotiating last year. And that could have saved us at least $2.5 million annually. So that is what we're proposing this year. And we used reserve funds to close the gap some more, right, of 4.195. And then we use appropriated fund balance to bridge the gap even more of $17.5 million. So again, we're using money that were intended for some things to close those gaps because we were not asking the community for money during that time. And at the same time, our health insurance increased by $9.8 million. So that is how we got to where we are. And we're at a point now where we have to correct our past actions. And again, no fault of anyone, no fault of the board. This was just a perfect storm that has come to realization.
Right.
Keep in mind, where we currently are as a district, other districts were last year because they didn't get their 2% for the foundation aid last year. Remember, I kept advocating for Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon was at a huge deficit last year. They're currently closing schools. Yonkers was at a huge deficit last year. They had to reduce their workforce. They were in the same place where we are now. If you read the newspaper, there are districts now that are changing their transportation plans because all districts realize that's the only way that we're going to garner any savings in perpetuity. If you look at even a district on Long Island, they are now faced with having to close one of their schools because half of their taxes go to charter schools. Their students are electing to go to the multiple charter schools that are there, and they have to send the money with those students. So we are in a position now that others have faced last year, this year, and we are all going to be facing in the future.
And with the charter schools, once the students leave our district, the money goes with their tuition money goes with them. But if they elect to come back to the public school, the money stays with the charter school, correct?
For a period of time. So
Okay.
I don't want anyone to think that the money stays in perpetuity. So the money goes with the child, but it depends on how quickly the state charter institute wants to receive the report from the charter school, check their attendance, and see if it's applicable for those monies to continue to go to them before they change the plan and send the money, or a state, you can now get that money from the state funding. So that in our exploration takes about 2 to 3 years. So if a child goes to a charter school for a week and that parent is unhappy with the charter school and puts them back into our public schools, potentially the funding can go to that charter school for 2 years or so before it's corrected. And we do not get the money back. We just get the funding source back.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Castellano?
I appreciate you walking us through that again, and thank you, Trustee Williams, for bringing that up. If you could point out slide 14, I did just want to acknowledge when you look back in time, when you start looking at 2014 to 15, and you notice from 2014 to 2020, every single year, the tax levy limit matches the adopted tax levy. We know that. We know that to be true. And that was a smart move at that time in terms of the budget and increasing access and opportunity and a world-class education for our students. And yet in 2020, March 2020, when COVID hit here, you see that from then on, the adjusted tax levy, the actual percent increase was lower each time. So a completely different trend line. And when I think back to being in this seat at that time or being virtual, because that was the way we had to operate at that time, we tried to do right by our community. We were reeling. We lost friends, we lost family, we lost neighbors, we lost businesses, we lost homes. And it was a time I never wish to go back to, not as a board member, not as a mother, not as a teacher. I never want to go back to that place. Yet I understand in reflection why we had to do what we had to do. We listened to the community. We listened to the needs of New Rochelle at that time, but we took a hit. And here we are now. And I know that our staff, our students, our families, prospective families even thinking about coming to New Rochelle are grappling with where we are as a city. And in some ways, because we've grown in some areas economically, we're seeing less funding. And that's the reality right now. It's complex. And I don't want to monopolize any more time, but I do look back often at my journals. And in 2020, I wrote a note to myself that said, make sure every budget that we present to the public is matched to our strategic roadmap. Make sure that everything that we are budgeting for, every tough decision that we have to make about additional funding or cuts is tied to our strategic roadmap, which lasts through 27. And so I just want to remind everyone who's listening, and we won't have time to do this today, and I would much rather hear from all of you and hear your questions, but on our district website, if you go to the nred.org and then you go to the More tab, you can go to the CSDNR data dashboard and actually see every single one of our metrics that we are trying so hard to reach and hold ourselves accountable to. And the reality is, superb staff is going to be impacted, as is resource management direction. And all of those priorities from our district roadmap are going to be felt through this budget this year. And I say that because I just want to continue to be transparent and to acknowledge that this is not the place that we want to be in, but also to make sure that every decision that is being made is in partnership with the very people who are in our school buildings every single day in front of children. That's our teachers, our TAs, our administrators, as well as our families, because there will be shifts, there will be changes. And I just hope that people can come in real life and have these discussions face to face, take it off of the Facebook groups or whatever it is that we're using, because we're here, we're listening. And I will say, this administration and this board, I have seen the increased community engagement. I've seen the changes from one meeting to the next. I've seen how budgets have actually shifted in response to collaboration with educators and the needs of our district over the last few years. And we are in a better place. Even if it does not feel that way right now, we are in a better place. And my hope is that even in the next few months to come, we can still find ways to come together and make the best of this situation that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castellamini. I just have one question. If you can go to slide 16. I see that we have for the 25-26 budget, federal aid, 860,000. What encompasses that aid? Is that the IDEA title funds? Or is that a somewhere else?
Federal aid.
Medicaid reimbursement.
Okay,
That's what that money is for.
gotcha. Do any of my colleagues have any questions?
Sorry, me again. So I have to say, this is the big to do what we have to do. This is the budget. This is the thing that we all have to, as a team up here, that's our focus. So sorry we're taking so long on this, but I just wanted to, I guess that the crisis with, I call it a crisis, but I guess the charter school issue is, it's looming because some of us are thinking 4 out of 10 of those schools make it. So what if they fail to launch for whatever reason? Does it still hold that sits out of our budget for 2 years if they don't kick off the way they think they are for whatever reason? Sorry
Just to
put you-
recap, and thank you for the question. Just to recap, there are two avenues that an organization can utilize in order to be approved for a charter in New York State. One is through application through the New York State Department of Education, which I'm going to just plainly state it, makes sense, right? So that is the body that governs public schools and schools pre-K through 12. That body is constituted by our Commissioner of Education, Dr. Betty Rosa, and our Board of Regents. That is a rigorous process in which organizations are, I'm going to say, ultra scrutinized to be sure that they should have a license to be in charge of children. Then there's a second process. That process is through the New York State Charter School Institute. The SUNY, the State University of New York Charter School Institute. That governing body is predominantly responsible for college and beyond education. That is run by the Commissioner of SUNY, Dr. King, Dr. John B. King, former state commissioner, along with a selected Board of Regents for the State University of New York. That, to me, to open up a charter for pre-K through 12, I'm going to say, education, does not fully make sense, but I'm just me. I don't have a full understanding. So with that being said, the Capital Preparatory Charter School of New Rochelle is a part of the Capital Preparatory Charter Coalition, and they have several other charter schools, one being in the Bronx, one and two in Connecticut. They applied for a charter through the SUNY Institute. There is not a lot of oversight on the SUNY Institute. As a matter of fact, I have to again commend my partners in the Federation of United School Employees, FUSE, my partners in the Administrators and Supervisors Association, ANS, that is the union of the administrators in this district, my partners in the New Rochelle PTA, who combined our efforts in an opposition to any charter school coming into New Rochelle because we feel that we can better serve our students than any charter school could. Capital Prep was approved. Capital Prep has a charter. The charter process ultimately goes to the NYSED, which is the Commissioner of Education and the Board of Regents, for them to put their eyes on it, question anything that doesn't look to be substantial enough for a school to open up in pre-K-12 setting. And the only power that they have is to push it back to the SUNY Charter Institute for them to make corrections and send it back again. So it's not like they can deny it. Okay. They get, a review process. So Capital Prep has been approved to open in September. As of right now, they're approved for grades K, 6 and 7. They anticipate opening with 150 students. The only time we send funds to the charter school is if those students belong to the city school district of New Rochelle, live within our borders. So if they have students coming from Mount Vernon, from the Bronx, the money follows those kids from there. We don't have to pay for those students, which is why we're only budgeting for 100 seats. We don't think that they'll have all 150. We could be wrong. So we could be soft budgeting. If they do not launch in September, they can open their doors anytime because they have a charter. As a matter of fact, a part of the provision of the charter states that even if they can't fill all of the seats they intend to open in their first year, even if they only have a minimum of 10 students, they can still operate as a charter school. So to answer questions from the community, we do not oversee the charter school. I really have no interest in how the charter school is going to operate moving forward. So please don't ask me any questions about the charter school because I don't, I'm sorry, let me collect myself. So, but yes, our money will go there and we have no control over the charter school. We have no say with the charter school. And as a matter of fact, they do not have to prescribe to the same laws and regulations that we do, which is what also incenses me.
Any last questions or comments? All right, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your questions.
Next up on the agenda is public comment. The Board of Education adopted policy 1230 in April 2022 to ensure all members of the public have the opportunity to speak at both of our board meetings each month. We believe it is crucial for us to hear from our community members about their concerns and issues. Having said that, please note that the board is here to listen. The public comment period is not designed to be a discussion. Accordingly, understand the board will not respond to your concerns and questions tonight. We take your concerns and questions seriously and want to have sufficient time to process and research issues if need be. We will, however, respond to your questions seriously. We will, however, respond to your questions and concerns at a future meeting or have the proper staff member get back to you at the appropriate time. I also want to point out that under state and federal privacy laws, we are unable to entertain any comments or questions about school personnel and students. Please know, however, that we take personnel concerns very seriously. On these matters, we would ask you to go through the appropriate administrative channels. Finally, we recognize that right now our nation and our community are polarized on a number of issues. That said, we want our school board meetings to serve as an example to our students that members of our school board and members of our community can deal with controversial issues in a civil manner and demonstrate mutual respect for one another. In that spirit, we will insist that all speakers and members of the audience maintain civility and respect for any divergent views that others possess. We ask that speakers please address their comments to the board directly rather than the audience. In the unlikely event the meeting becomes unruly, the board will recess the meeting and return once order has been restored. Finally, I want to remind everyone that you may submit written comments to the board in lieu of speaking tonight during the public comment period if you so choose. Tonight, we have set aside 30 minutes for public comment, where each speaker who has signed up before 3:30 today has 3 minutes to speak. If a person requests to speak after 3:30, you may sign up in person at the meeting with the clerk and will be afforded the opportunity to speak during the public comment period if time permits. First up for public comment is Mr. Vincent Malfitano.
Hi, good evening. Vince Malfitano. I was hoping somebody from Senator Shelley Mayer's office would be here tonight. Maybe they are. As chairperson of the Senate Education Committee, I've asked her office to come here and give us a little breakdown as to what she's doing. Our legislative body from our community, Ms. Poland, Mr. Otis, Senator Fernandez, have not really helped us out too much. It'd be nice if they showed up. So maybe you can invite them to come and talk. This is about shared pain. A meeting or two ago, I mentioned it seemed like the North End schools were skating free on the elementary school. And I think Ms. Bresnan or somebody said no, and she was right. I was not right about that. The North End schools are starting earlier, and the South End schools, except one, are starting later. Everybody's getting screwed. Parents, everybody. Class sizes, people being laid off, 4% tax hike. Well, look, this is your baby. You were warned about this by jokers like me and others, and you just blew it off and hired 5,000 people. I don't know what the story is. But another quick thing. People talked about the buses being empty, and I think the superintendent said they're maxed out. We have to reserve a seat. How long? All year? Don't we have anybody asking around, hey, do we really have to keep a seat on a bus empty all year if a kid doesn't take it? Let's get creative with some of our questions to the state. This is a collaboration to try to save people's lives here, people, as well as our community. As I mentioned before, when I was with the UFT in the city as a delegate, helped negotiating a contract 20 some, I don't know how many, when we had a budget crisis, we agreed to forego our raises, as you and others, Mr. Superintendent, have courageously and boldly done with administrators. I am asking for Ms. Breslin and the union to consider to help save your colleagues by foregoing some raises temporarily. We did it. Let's not be, hey, it's me and it's nobody else. Now, I'm hoping those discussions are taking place. Maybe that'll help us out. But in the long run, folks, elections have consequences. We need some real out-of-the-box thinkers on this board. I don't know if it's going to ever happen in the 40-some, 5-odd years I've been coming here, but we have an opportunity to work together to save each other if we want to. So let's try to reach out and have some meaningful discussion between our bargaining units and administration.
Next up is Mr. Isaac Jonas. No? Okay. Next up is Ms. Miriam Dasim.
So good evening. When I look at this budget again, I think it's reckless that we're here. There's a whole lot of explanations, but we saw this happening, and we're getting the reason that because of COVID, we didn't have the hard discussion. It doesn't add up. So, for example, the first thing is, let's focus in on these numbers. Last year, we got $12 million from the state. This is how much they thought they should give us. With that, the formula says that, okay, the tax levy is 3.95%. That's how much they thought the taxpayers should contribute. You didn't have to do a supermajority, right? This year, the formula being used, and I understand it was changed, but they're saying that they only need to give you $337,000, but the tax amount that should be coming from us should only be 0.33%. Yet, in order for us to begin to start to balance this budget, you've got to get 3.95% out of us. Why is it that they're seeing that we should only need to contribute 0.33%, but you see we need 3.95%? So what are they seeing? What contributions are they seeing that says they don't have to give 12 million, they only need to give the 337,000, and that we don't need to give 3.95%, we only need to give 0.33%? What contributions are they saying that is making up that difference so that we don't have to give as much? We should know that. I don't know that. That's one. And so it's important to hear that we are, yes, it's the same tax amount percentage, but you're over the tax levy. So you're asking us to approve something that technically the formula says we shouldn't need to contribute this amount. That's why you have to get the 61% supermajority. I hope everybody understands that, because it's like, oh, we got the same increase as we did last year. Doesn't matter. You're over that tax levy by a lot. So we need to understand why. Why is it that they're not expecting us to put in as much? What is the difference? Where are they expecting that money to come from? That should be explained here. So I don't have any confidence in this because there's so much left out. You're busing. We asked you, we see empty buses, and then you answered with this very dismissive rhetorical, well, seats are guaranteed to kids, and, and it might be at the end of the run. Okay, so does that mean 50% of the usage is not there? We should know those numbers. You don't have that. So we don't have any confidence in what you're telling us. You should give us those numbers so we understand what we're doing, because then we can go back and say, hey, we can get rid of those 50%. We can talk to the parents. There's options here, but we haven't done it. It's missing so much more. Thank you. Thank you for letting me finish.
Thank you, Ms. Desim. Next up is Mr. Singletary.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. In regards to the budget, like I am, have a lot of mixed feelings, a lot of hurt feelings, to be honest. And looking at the numbers, there's certain things I see, which, you know, it's a challenging situation we're in. I agree with, you know, my neighbor relating to the point of shared pain. And I applaud the superintendent as well as his staff on basically being taken a part of that shared pain. And if the teachers union and so forth are willing to also accept that, I applaud them also. In looking at a few of these numbers, I think there's certain things that jump out at me, particularly if this budget isn't approved, going down to the contingency budget basically will require a decrease in revenue of about $9 million. That's factoring that you've already factored in what was a creative solution to basically lower expense relating to transportation. That is a huge, huge situation you're dealing with, because if I heard a member Ross correctly, if you were to maintain services, it'll be around a $6 million increase, which means that if you were to factor that into the tax levy, it's about a 3% increase. So instead of talking about a 3.95% increase, you'll be talking close to a 7% increase. I don't think my constituents and neighbors will agree to that. But I think another thing people are saying, why do we have to pay more taxes when we have, you know, less services? That's going to be something that, as you talk to our community, that they really need to understand the numbers and impact. Do we really want to have an increased taxes of 7% to maintain services related to transportation? And then here's some of the things that I've observed and like has really impacted me. I mean, for those that know me, they know that I'm really about quality of education. I'm really into, you know, having programs for our youth, whether or not it's athletics or, academic enhancements. So when we, you know, also we also have to have the understanding of having quality of education. I applaud maintaining services such as PAVE, such as extracurricular activities, such as Kaleidoscope. But when I see net student services, My Brother's Keeper and so forth being decreased by, 100%, talking about a net decrease of about 1.15 million, but we also have to accommodate a charter school for 1.9 million. I sometimes think if we didn't have this allocate costs for this charter school, would we be able to retain those services? That's what's on my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Singletary. Just to really point out the MBK code and the family community engagement, those are being recoded, so that it's not being net to zero. You hear me? I'm sorry. The codes for MBK family community, they're being recoded, so they're not going to zero. No. Anybody else like to sign up for public comment? Otilia?
So thank you. And thank you, Superintendent's Cabinet, for taking the hit and sharing the costs. And I really appreciate that. I think that's a great answer to sharing the burden of this. I'm sorry, I appreciate the Superintendent's Cabinet sharing the costs and sharing the burden of what we're going through right now. I just want to remind the board that in the past, we had a budget cafe and we had engagement with the community. And I think in the past, we had a budget cafe and we had an exchange with the community. We were able to ask questions specific to the budget, in addition to the 3 minutes that we might have had when we wanted to share comments. So I think that would be helpful. during this time to really engage the community in the conversations. Right now, we have questions and comments and concerns, but some of my friends remember back in the day, 15, 20 years, we would have gone to a budget cafe. And then we would have had a separate meeting here just discussing the budget. And then we would have had a separate meeting, just having a Board of Ed meeting where we can have a conversation and have our 3 minutes. So that's what's changed. And I think that we need to bring it back so we can relieve some of these hostilities and concerns. But it's not fair for us to sit here and to hear what's the proposed budget, and then we don't have an opportunity to engage. So that's just that. As far as the union is concerned, it's more than just teachers that are part of the union. We had this meeting earlier, and I reminded folks that the majority of our voters are SRP and civil service. So we can't exclude them. We have to continue to include them and not just say the teachers union. So it's not a caste system. So our union is made up of folks that love our children, you know, from our lunch monitors every day. Our lunch monitors at Columbus School, we have the best lunch monitors in the district. And our teachers are the finest. And our support staff are the finest. And our buildings are immaculate. And that's what's at stake. And I get it. But every single person in our building, I can't think of one person, maybe one, in our entire building. It doesn't matter. No, it's not. I said in our building, Mr. Monfantano, not in the district. I know you have good intentions, but in our building, I can't think of one, but everyone else, they love our kids. And this is what we're talking about. So I'm just going to request this one thing. When we do talk about layoffs and cutting back, I'm interested in the demographics of those who are going to be fired. I want to know how many people of color, how many young men, they won't be able to get jobs as consultants. They're not going to be able to work from home. So are we going to help them get new jobs? Can they become bus monitors so we don't have a shortage of bus monitors? So I want to know how many women, what age group, are you going to fire all the old ladies like me? Are you going to fire all the young? Oh, I don't need you to cut. Don't do that thing to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Otilia. Would anybody else like to sign up for public comment? Ms. Lorraine Carl.
Lorraine Carl. I'm known to be a hoarder. So what did I find? Last year's budget. I'm wondering if we're going to get this type of booklet. I think the Board of Ed needs this booklet. Okay, you're going to get it? Great. So no more slides. Under tax exemption,
Ms. Carl.
I see the IDA. So now we have 2 council people here. So we're not going to stop building, right? I suggest that you go to the IDA and tell them no more pilots. That we should have collected $1 billion. $1 billion. We
Lorraine.
would not be in this.
Ms. Carl, just direct the
Oh,
comments to us.
sorry.
It's okay.
All right. We would have had $1 billion. So Will, you're on the IDA, right?
Yep.
No more pilots. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carl. Would anybody else like to sign up for public comment tonight? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to our new business consent agenda personnel resolutions. Colleagues, can I get a motion and second to approve consent agenda for personnel resolutions number 25-306, 1 through 4, and number 25-307, 1 through 2, according to the recommended action for each item?
So moved, Ross.
Second, Lewis.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is new business consent agenda general resolutions. For this one, we did add a resolution after we printed it, so it's incorrect. So I'm gonna, we added a resolution authorizing a side agreement between Fuse and the City School District of New Rochelle. So colleagues, can I get a motion and a second to approve consent agenda for general resolutions number 25-308 through number 25-309, according to the recommended action for each item?
So moved, Brooks.
Second, Lewis.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next meeting will be Thursday, March 20th at Davis Elementary School. Colleagues, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
So moved, Brooks.
Second, Lewis.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?